All right, so as I said, this is our homesteading series. We're going over beekeeping tonight. I'm very excited to have Shanda King here. Shanda has been a huge help in the past with introductory beekeeping courses that we've offered to our Veterans and Heroes to Agriculture program. She did a phenomenal job last year and was a great resource at accessing some of the mentors around the state. So she is a wonderful person to learn from and to know, to find different resources and people around the state if you're trying to get into beekeeping. So I'm very excited to have her. I'm going to go through a couple quick slides here. So again, I'm going to go over our business development division. Many of you probably seen the slide a few different times, but we'll do it anyways. And then, like I said, we got Shanda King talking. So first, under our business development division, we have our planning coordinators. They're located around the state, and they're kind of our boots on the ground, representing the department there. If you have any kind of questions as far as, marketing your products, getting started, trying to navigate resources. If you're interested in things like West Virginia Grown, our West Virginia Grown program is a premier branding program for locally grown products. It's a great program that they can help you out with. And then they also assist with navigating some of the more technical resources there at the department. If you're wanting to get started in farmers markets and have questions about regulations and what you can sell, what qualifies as a cottage food, and so on. So if you are interested in reaching out to any of those folks, give us a contact here at the department, 304-558-2210. You'll see there, kind of in the center portion of the state. Right now we don't have somebody specifically covering that area, but if you fall in those areas, please don't hesitate to reach out. We a lot of times cover down and try to cover those areas. And then, so I mentioned our West Virginia Grown program, again, premier branding program for locally grown West Virginia products. It's a great way to stand out, as somebody who produces here locally. You could be a value-added producer, you could be a grower. There's a lot of different uses for this program. So if you're interested in that, again, reach out to us. You can either use that same phone number, 558-2210, or you can use the email here, westvirginiagrown@wvda.us. And one last program here through business development, our Veterans and Heroes to Agriculture program. Mentioned earlier that Shanda helped with some beekeeping training last year, and we look to work with her a lot more in the future too. But that's one of the things that we do here is we do a lot of training and educational programs. We offer scholarships through a number of different courses available through different extension and partners and so forth around the state and the country. So, those opportunities can be found on our website at agriculture.wv.gov, or you can give us a call there at 558-2210. I'm the planning coordinator for that. So, feel free to reach out to me. And my name's Dane Gaiser, by the way. I don't think I mentioned that earlier. Again, a lot of educational training opportunities, and then we work in partnership with our planning coordinators to help veterans, first responders, and that includes sheriffs, police, and other law enforcement personnel, emergency medical technicians, firefighters, and so on. If you qualify for in any of those categories, give us a call. We're glad to help you out, get you started, and connect you with some of these resources. And with that said, that pretty well wraps up my slides. If nobody has any questions on any of those things, I'll go ahead and pass it on to Shanda. One quick reminder, though, we will have homesteading again next week. Or I'm sorry, not next week, 2 weeks from now, April 6th, same time, 6 p.m. And that one's going to be on equine management. So anybody interested in the horse business, having a couple horses around the house there, make sure you jump on. And with that, I'm going to stop presenting here and allow Shanda to hop on and say hello. Are you there, Shanda? There she is.
Okay. Is it coming through the presentation?
Yep, I've got it here.
All right. Okay. Good evening, everybody. Like Dane said, I am the state apiarist with the West Virginia Department of Agriculture, and my job is basically anything and everything having to do with honeybees and beekeeping in the state. So I am very, very into education and promoting the knowledge of honeybees and beekeeping around the state. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. First off, I'm going to talk a little bit about honeybees in general, and then at the end we'll talk a little bit about getting started. I know we have some beekeepers in the presentation, and hopefully we have some brand new people who don't know anything about it. So when I was preparing this presentation, I wanted to approach it in a manner of perhaps you didn't know much about it or anything at all, and just to kind of give you a very exciting peek into beekeeping. There's not a second that I don't enjoy speaking about honeybees or beekeeping, and they still completely amaze me. So I was going back and reading our little promotion for this class this evening, and I noted that the ad called me an expert beekeeper, but I would like to point out that you should never consider yourself an expert or beyond the realm of knowledge or learning. And I love this quote that said that you must remember that you are a beginner for the first 20 years. And with beekeeping, that is probably accurate. Do not be intimidated by it. However, it is probably, I consider it the best puzzle that I've ever done in my entire life. It's very exciting. You never get tired of it. I thought when I was a new beekeeper, I thought, well, eventually this is going to get old and it's going to get boring. Not so. I continue to be amazed every single year, and this is the perfect time of year. Beekeepers get very excited across the state. The bees are getting going. Our colonies are coming out of winter. The flowers are starting to bloom. It's very exciting for the bees and for the beekeepers. Now, first off, we're going to go over what exactly is a colony. What people consider a hive, usually beekeepers will call the equipment is the hive, and everything inside the bees and their resources is called the colony. So in this photo, each one of these stacks of boxes is a colony. Each one of those is one colony. And I say that not to demean your knowledge, but I have had people who don't know anything about it think that each one of those boxes is kind of like an apartment, and there's a colony of bees in each little tiny section. Or I've even had people ask me, is there one bee per colony? So in each one of these boxes is the colony, and each colony can vary in size. Smaller colonies can be anywhere probably around 3,000 to 5,000. Larger colonies in the summer can get up to about 65,000 bees. So it just varies by strength of the colony, by how many bees are in each one of those boxes. Now, once we open that box, inside of each one of those boxes, the most typical hive setup, there are 10 frames. And you can see this beekeeper here, he's holding what we call a frame. And on the frame can be varying things. these are some examples of what you might see. If you pull out a frame out of that box, you're doing an inspection. The upper left is a pollen frame. Bees collect pollen as their protein source, and bees will also collect nectar as their carbohydrate source. And the frame on the upper right is a frame of honey. That's capped honey. That's their carbohydrate source for their energy. They need pollen as their protein in order to raise babies, which beekeepers will call brood. In the bottom left photo, that is brood. That's capped brood. After, if you remember from science class, and insects go through an egg, a larvae, and then a pupae. Once it's capped like that with that light brown wax capping, it goes into the pupae stage. And then once that bee reaches day 21 of development, it will chew its way out of that little cap and hatch, and it's an adult. It's a young bee. They look kind of different if you're in there inspecting, but it is an adult. Now we're going to go over what types of bees are in the colony. You remember the colony is in that box, and the frames are in the boxes. So when you pull out a frame and you're looking at all the bees on the frames, there are 3 types of bees that are in the colony. First, we're going to talk about the queen, because everybody likes to talk about the queen bee. Usually, there's only 1 per colony. And most of the time when I'm doing presentations, I will never say always, and I will never say never, because the second you do that, you will be proven wrong. Yes, occasionally there are colonies that have 2 queens, but usually there's 1. And she is the mother of all the other bees that are in that colony. She laid the eggs, the workers raise the eggs, but she is the mother. She can lay up to 2,000, when she's in full production, up to 2,000 eggs per day. And that can be up to her body weight in eggs. Therefore, she has to eat a lot. So the workers, there are certain workers that take care of her. They will follow her around. They feed her, they groom her, and all she's worried, she can feed herself, but they also feed her. But she's got one mission, and that mission is to lay eggs. Now, she is the longest lived bee in the colony. She can live up to 5 years, which is very unusual. You'll see when I get to talking about the worker bees, they're much shorter lived. So it's very important if you become a beekeeper, that remembering that there's only 1 queen in the colony. When you're inspecting, you're very careful with your movements, because if you accidentally squash her, then they have to replace her, which takes time. So that's why it's always important to work calmly. And yes, it can take you a while to get to that calm stage, but that's completely normal. Okay, so that's our first bee we've talked about. Our second bee that we're going to talk about tonight is the worker bees. That is the majority of the population of the colony. There can be up to 80,000. Now, that is a very high number, closer to around here in West Virginia, probably 65,000 workers. They are all female. All of the workers in the colony are female. They do all of the labor that is required. When a bee chews out of that wax cap and begins her life as a worker bee, she goes through various jobs throughout her lifetime. When she's a very new bee, she cleans the colony. Then she progresses to feeding some of the other developing babies or brood. She will feed older brood, then she starts feeding younger brood. Then she gets old enough to start producing wax. Some of them become guard bees, some of them take care of the queen. Then her last job is forager. So that's when they leave the colony and start searching for pollen, nectar, and other things that the colony requires. And she will do that until she dies. A honeybee that is born in the summer only lives about 6 weeks on average. She spends 3 of those 6 weeks doing jobs that are inside of the colony, and the last 3 weeks of her job being a forager outside of the colony. So all those tasks are performed by the workers. So that's the second bee that's in the colony. The third and final bee that we're going to talk about are the drones. The drones are the males of the colony, and he has only one job. He does not do any of the jobs that the workers do. His job is to pass on the colony's genetics by attempting to mate with a virgin queen. And this is a way that the colony spreads its genetics. In the summer, a colony, well, actually, they're beginning right now. I was in a couple hives today, and drone production is beginning. They will start producing drones, and the stronger the colony, the more drones they will produce. And that's how the colony gets its genetics out. So once it gets to fall time, however, there are no more colonies producing queens. So most colonies do not allow the drones to stay in the colony over winter. They will kick them out so that they don't have to feed them all winter, and will not allow them to stay in the colony. And then once it gets spring again, they'll start reproducing. This is what we talked about earlier. The honeybees have jobs. The workers have jobs, not the drones. They do everything from the cleaning of the hive. So when a young bee hatches, they have to clean out the cell, or the queen will not come back in and lay in that cell until it has been cleaned. They feed the larvae, they take care of the queen, they make the wax, they guard the hive, and they gather the nectar and the pollen. But nectar and pollen are not the only things that honeybees gather. They also require water for the hive, whether that is to reconstitute honey that has crystallized and went solid, or they use it to cool the inside of the hive in the summer if it gets really, really hot. They will also gather minerals from soil, or like areas where there's kind of stagnant water. They will also collect plant resins from trees, or some plants also produce resins, and they use that plant resin as the coating inside of the colony. If you've ever heard, if you're into natural and health food, it's called propolis. And the propolis is antibacterial, antiviral, and antifungal. So it is a very good way of keeping the inside of that colony a sterile environment, because it is humid in there, so it could be prone to bacteria and fungi. Well, if I can get my slides to advance. Well, okay. Honeybees will not only gather more natural things like we think of as nectar and pollen, but sometimes they come into conflict with humans and will gather things that we may not think of them as gathering, such as animal feed dust or bird feed dust, especially when it gets towards spring and before the plants are flowering. They will look for things that they can gather because they are just looking for something to do, looking for nutrients to bring into the colony. And there are minute traces of protein and nutrients in, say, corn dust or from our animal feed or from bird feed. But once the trees start blooming, and the first trees that bloom in West Virginia are maples. So once the maples start flowering, the honeybees will stop getting on the bird feeders and our animal feed, like chicken feed. I get a lot of phone calls, people thinking there are swarms, but they're just really after that dust. So once that the trees start blooming, they cease that behavior. In the summer, sometimes we will go into what's in the beekeeping world is called a dearth. And what a dearth is a period where there is little to no nectar coming into the colonies. So sometimes it happens in July, some years not, some years it does. But if you see honeybees swarming a hummingbird feeder, a lot of times there's a dearth going on, and the bees are after that sugar water because they need nutrients to raise their babies. And if there's none to be had, they will take sugar water. Also, a lot of times in parks, we will see them swarming like a garbage can where there might be some pop left in some cans. And that's also usually during a period of dearth that they tend to do that. So how do honeybees find whether they're looking for nectar or pollen, or they're after your hummingbird feeder or any source of food? I love telling this story to people who especially don't really know much about honeybees. It is quite amazing. Now, keep in mind that this is a bee that she's only living for 6 weeks in the summer. They will find there are certain bees in the colony whose job are scouts. So their job is to go look for new sources of pollen or nectar. And they will fly back to the colony and they do what is called a waggle dance to communicate to the other bees that are around them the exact location of the source. So the wiggly part that you can see, the zigzaggy part, is telling the bees around her that's watching this dance the distance from the hive that the source is. And the angle at which she performs this dance on the surface of the comb, remember you pulled those frames out of there and the honeycomb that's there, the angle is the angle that the bees, when they leave the colony, the angle to the sun. So her dance is telling them what angle to fly at and what distance. And that's how they know exactly where the source is. And the third thing that she communicates is how fast and how much energy that she puts into the dance tells them how good the source is. So if it's a very, very big patch of goldenrod, for example, because that's one flower that honeybees love, she may dance with lots of energy. Whereas if it was a smaller patch, maybe not so much energy. And that's how the bees know where the new sources are. And so the workforce shifts from maybe a flower that's stopping blooming to one that's maybe just coming into bloom. So I just find that very fascinating. And this is something that you can see when you start keeping bees, is you'll pull a frame out and you'll see a bee and she's just wiggling back and forth. And if you sit there and watch her, she is doing this dance. And scientists have nailed it down to the point where they can actually watch this bee and measure and everything, and they can tell what flower she's talking about. Like they can take that angle measurement, they can measure her distance, and they can go in the direction that she's indicating and find what she's talking about with the dance. So it's very interesting. And so not only do you get to see all this, you get to tell all your friends about honeybees and fill their ears with it, which is kind of funny. Okay, so all of this dancing and all of this collecting, and one honeybee will only make 1/12 of 1 teaspoon of honey in her entire lifetime of work as a forager. When I learned that when I was a brand new beekeeper, I felt so guilty, but not to feel guilty, because A colony of honeybees, on average, makes 3 times more honey than they will need to survive the winter. So that is where we become managers. So we are taking this creature, which is technically a wild creature, it will never be tame, and we are managing it for honey production. So do not feel guilty because you are actually doing them a favor. If you did not harvest honey, they would run out of room or swarm and you would lose some of your bees. So, but I found that entirely fascinating. Are honeybees in danger? You hear all of the honeybees are dying, the pollinators are dying. Yes and no. It's a complicated question and it's full of controversy. And if you get into beekeeping, you will learn beekeepers disagree. Yes, they are, in the sense that there is no other animal that has as high of a loss rate as we do in beekeeping. It is considered completely acceptable by the U.S. Department of Agriculture that we lose approximately 25% of our colonies every year. If we were losing 25% of any other managed animal that we have, there would probably be a national emergency. But a lot of people just are not aware that we are having massive losses in beekeeping world. Now, why are we losing bees? Number one, we are fighting a pest that got here in the mid-80s called a Varroa mite. It is similar to, say, like a tick that is on your dog. This mite that gets on the bees carries viruses, a tremendous amount of viruses. I think the most recent count is between 14 and 20 different viruses. So we as beekeepers, we have to constantly monitor our colonies. And then once our bees get to a certain threshold of these mites in our colonies, then we have to treat. Now, the problem with that is that it's not consistent. For example, I can't tell someone, if you treat in April and August and December, your bees will be fine, because that Varroa mite population is highly connected to the bee's life cycle. So, and which is connected to weather. So it can vary very greatly with weather. But once the beekeeper understands how to monitor and how to treat, so there's a learning curve, then the survival becomes much higher. But it's going to take learning to get there. That is the number one thing for honeybee loss. 88% of all colonies in West Virginia that are lost over the winter are due to this mite and the lack of management of this mite. Even if you do everything, you're still going to lose some. It's just that your losses become less. Maybe not so much in West Virginia, but elsewhere in the country, habitat loss is a problem. In areas, for example, that there is very large-scale agriculture, there's not as much wild foraging for the bees, which leads to malnutrition. If you are eating a monoculture diet, your nutrition is going to suffer in the colony. When nutrition suffers, then it is a cascading effect on bee health and bee lifespans and how they feed their babies. So it just snowballs. Changing weather patterns is very difficult for beekeepers. Example, last year in West Virginia, we had a very late, very hard freeze in May. That very late, very hard freeze in May led a vast majority of the state to losing their tulip poplar bloom, which is a very strong spring flow for most beekeepers. So when you lose a big source like that, then you may have to feed your bees. If you don't feed your bees, it is a potential that they starve. So that can affect survivability. Agricultural practices, maybe not so much in West Virginia, but you must reduce risk of exposure for honeybees by following a lot of the recommended treatments. Say if you own an apple orchard, for example, working with the bees' behavior and how you spray the trees. And sometimes public misinformation can lead to bee losses, such as like we're approaching for beekeepers swarming season. Sometimes public don't realize that honeybee swarms are not dangerous and they will spray them or kill them, and which there's no need to do so. So we spend a lot of time working with the public and trying to change that mindset. Honeybees and plants. Honey is not the most important thing that honeybees produce. The most important aspect of honeybees and the existence of bees is what they do for pollination. Our agriculture is tremendously reliant on commercial honeybee pollination. 85% of all plants only are able to reproduce because of pollination by a bee. Now, this is not just honeybees, these can be native bees as well. But 1/3 of all of our food that we eat is because of a honeybee most pollinating. And more than 100 of our crops in the United States are pollinated by our commercial pollinators. Some crops are 90% dependent on honeybees. For example, our cherries, our blueberries, and our almonds. Right now, almond pollination in California is ending. And just the almonds take almost around 80% of every honeybee colony in the United States goes to the almonds for pollination. And then they travel from there. A lot of them travel to other crops. But if we did not have honeybees for those pollinations, you would not be able to go to the store and buy those items. Honeybees, they've tried to estimate, it's very difficult, what value that honeybees have just for pollination services. And the current estimate is about $14 billion is what the value of what they provide to our farmers in value for pollination. These are a lot of the areas across the United States where our crops flow. So usually the beekeeping season begins in California with the almonds. And then from there, they vary where they go across the state. We do have commercial beekeepers in West Virginia who send bees to the almonds. This year we probably sent at least probably 4,000 colonies to California, just West Virginia. And we are a very small state in terms of commercial beekeepers. But even we do. And then our beekeepers come back here. Some of them go into honey production. Some of them send to the apples and the melons in Delaware and blueberries in Maine. So we do also provide commercial pollination services. So what are the steps to becoming a beekeeper? The best advice I can give you is in this list right here. I put a lot of thought into it. You need to study, and study more. If you spend 10 to 15 minutes a day, watch one video, read something, read an article, talk to someone for a couple minutes, you will be amazed how fast your knowledge will advance. I began probably reading and studying about a year before I got bees. That doesn't mean that you can't just get bees. There are many different paths, and there is no one correct way to keep bees. Remember that. There's not one correct way. There's many correct ways. What works for you, and if you are successful, that is an okay way. I would recommend finding your local club. Most of them are on Facebook, and most of them are starting to begin in-person meetings again. And through that club, a lot of clubs will be able to set you up with a mentor, which is very important. And any time that you can spend in the bees, you will be learning. I don't care if if your mentor says, come on over, we're going to make splits. Come on over, we're just going to do an inspection. Do it. Take them up on it. Spend the time. Take a beginner class if you can find one. And take more than one class. Take them through multiple clubs. Take one online. Take one in person. Whatever you can find. The more exposure, the faster your learning curve is going to be. Once you start learning, the first decision you're going to have to decide is, what hive style am I going to use? There are different styles. The most traditional style is what's called 2 deeps. So in the area that is just the bees area, you're not going to take anything from them. That's their resources, are 2 deep boxes. And then as you produce honey, the honey's on top, and that's going to be yours. Now, some people don't like to lift on those deep boxes, because let me tell you, they can weigh up to 80, 90 pounds if it was full of honey. That's heavy. Some people want to run medium boxes, which makes less weight, less lifting. The hive widths can be, some come in 10 frames, some only come in 8 frames. So if you run in an 8 frame medium setup, it's less heavy. So if you have trouble lifting, that might be something to consider. There are hive styles that are horizontal instead of vertical, and that where there's no lifting of boxes, but that's a different learning curve as well. So talk to as many people as you can talk to. What kind of hive style do you run? Can I come and see your bees? Can I work your bees with you? Most beekeepers are more than willing to let you come and work in their colonies with them, so that you can get experience and see what are the different styles like. Maybe you don't want to lift 85 pounds during an inspection. But the best way is to work with people. I do recommend that once you decide on your hive style, you be consistent across your whole apiary, your whole bee yard, because it can run into trouble with equipment exchange. If like some of your hives, you're running deep boxes, some of them you're running medium, sometimes you need to exchange frames. It doesn't work sometimes. So decide what you're going to do at the beginning and be consistent. When you start looking for the source of your bees, I personally recommend local bee producers that are producing local, what's called nukes, N-U-C, nuke. A nuke is just short for nucleus colony, and that's just a starter colony. If the traditional hive setup is 10 frames, a nuke most of the time is 4 to 5 frames. And you'll go pick it up from the producer, and it's just like a miniature colony. It has all 3 bee types, usually queens, workers, drones. It's got frames in there. The frames have brood on them, honey, pollen, and then you'll just bring it home and put it right into your box. Local bees, not only are you helping the local economy, you're helping a local bee farmer. You are buying local bees. You're not bringing them in from Georgia, wherever they're coming from. It's more successful for brand new beekeepers to start with a nuke versus a package. What is a package? That's the 2 most common ways for a beekeeper to get started. A nucleus colony, which is your basic starter 5 frame, or a package. A package is just what it sounds like. It's literally a little box that has 3 pounds of bees in it and a queen. You don't get frames. You don't get resources. It can come in the mail. You can go to the post office and pick up your package of bees and bring them home. However, they aren't local. They're coming from usually Georgia. You don't have that starter resources. You don't have that starter frames. You don't have brood. So you're going to put them in your box, and they're going to have to start from scratch. It can be done. It's just harder for a brand new beekeeper, but it is possible. I've seen it. I mean, many beekeepers do it. Find your local bee supply shop. We have all kinds across West Virginia. It's really good to get that local connection. They will know people. They will be able to help you in the future if you go queenless, you need to buy a queen, you need equipment. A lot of times when you're dealing with the catalogs, they're backlogged right when you need equipment. Guess what? Everybody else needs it too. So a lot of times things are back ordered and it takes a long time to get them. But to have that local supply shop connection is really, really good. Now, next, be patient. Be patient. Have realistic expectations of yourself. The first year, you need to just learn to recognize things, learn to know what a queen looks like, know what the workers look like, know what drones look like, know what brood, nectar, pollen, all those things. Just learn to recognize things. Just spend time with your bees. If you spend time with them, they are the best teachers of all. You observe them, you watch them, and they teach you, so that you will get in your colony and you see what normal looks like. You see what normal looks like. And then one day, if something looks not normal, you're going to recognize it right away. And then you may not know what it is. Normal, completely normal. Do not be afraid to ask someone. Ask your mentor, ask your club, ask me. That's what I do all the time. A beekeeper who knows what they're talking about can tell you a lot from a photo. So when you're in your bees, use technology to your advantage. Get your phone out, take pictures of your frames, send them to your mentor. Does this look normal? They'll be able to tell you. So be very patient. There is a learning curve that you're dealing with here. Remember, this is an insect. It's not a chicken. It is a social insect, which makes it even more complicated. Every individual in that colony, they have their own jobs. They're part of a whole. So you will, over time, you get in there and you observe and you're seeing the pattern. And to get to that point where you're not nervous when you get in your colony, and to look past all the movement and to see what's going on, that takes a little time. So be real with yourself and don't expect yourself to be an expert beekeeper right away. There is a learning curve involved. Plan ahead. As a beekeeper, this is something that takes a little time to learn how to do. So we're going to be patient with ourselves. We're going to try to get to the point where we're proactive and we're not reactive to something. For example, you'll get to see, oh, my colony, look at all this brood I have is getting ready to hatch. The population of my colony is getting ready to double. I'm going to need another box. So instead of saying, oh my goodness, I need one right now, I got to go buy one, and having to paint it or assemble it, whatever you have to do, we're going to have one waiting. So to get to that point, you'll get there, but you're planning ahead and we're going to be proactive. So that's my best advice tips for becoming a beekeeper. Now, there are some things that you need to know about if you're owning and you're running an apiary, which is a bee yard in West Virginia. You are required to register, and we do have online registration. And that is because if there's ever a disease outbreak. I will give one example. Last year, we had a case that in the Panhandle, and I was going to in one bee yard, and I went to our database and I found all the beekeepers around, and we went to make sure that it was contained, and it was. So that's why we have that registration. It protects you as a beekeeper. The only time that you are required to be inspected, like this time of year, I start my inspections, is if you're selling bees. So you're selling nukes, you're selling queens, and once again, that's just prevention of spread of disease. We don't want anybody selling our new beekeepers anything that might have a disease on it, because new beekeepers don't know. So we protect the new beekeepers that way. There are regulations regarding honey labels. They don't need to be approved, but that is also available on the Department of Agriculture's website. In addition to state laws, you need to make sure that where you live, honeybees are allowed, because if there is a local ordinance, say if you are within city limits, or a homeowners association regulation over that, those will supersede any state rules. So you need to check with if you're in city limits, make sure that it's okay. And also if you're in a homeowners association, then to make sure that it's allowed. If you decide to get to the point where you have your hives and you register them with the state, we ask on the registration form if you would like to participate in something called our best management practices. And what that does is provide protection from civil lawsuits regarding your honeybees. So that is voluntary. So if that is something that you may be interested in, there is a link on the apiary site that discusses what is involved with covering the things that are involved with the best management practices. And also, when you get your bees, if you are a new beekeeper or a minority, you can qualify for free coverage through the Farm Service Agency, and it's called the NAP and ELAP programs, and it covers colony loss and honey production loss due to weather-related problems. What are the challenges? So what are you in for? What are going to be the problems? It is expensive. It is not cheap to buy and maintain equipment and bees, especially startup costs. Bees are more expensive than they ever have been, and the cost is rising. Compared to last year to this year, wood and ware equipment is up about 30% in most of the national catalogs. So look into it, price it. You'll see. Take it seriously because it's not cheap. It is a complicated and steep learning curve. However, you can lower that curve by doing those things that I recommended: studying, joining a club, finding a mentor. And this next point is you will 100% contend with disease and pests. Do not fall into the trap of wishful thinking that you don't have mites. I cannot tell you how many times I've heard beekeepers say, I haven't seen a mite. They are there. At any one time, up to about 80% of the mites, you are under those wax cappings on the baby bees that are developing. So you aren't seeing them. And even if they are on the bees, they're hidden under the bottoms of the bees. So that's why you must learn how to monitor for the mites and do not hide from them. They are there. They are in every colony in this state, and every beekeeper in this state has lost colonies due to mites. I promise you. I have. Everyone has. They will take your bees down. So if you go into it with the realization, I'm going to learn everything I can about them, and I'm not going to ignore them, you're in a much better starting position. It can be very weather dependent, like I was telling you about that late freeze last year. If you are intending on being a honey producer, that can affect you. So have that in your mind. And theft, as always, is on the increase because bees are valuable. Equipment is expensive. And my last piece of advice is if you become a beekeeper, you will hear this phrase: be a beekeeper, not a bee haver. That means that is a creature, that is an animal. You are going to do everything you can to take care of it, to keep it. You're not going to just have them. They're not going to sit there outside in your yard. you're going to check on them. If they need mite treatments, you're going to take care of them. If they need food, you're going to feed them. So it is going to require you interacting with them. And that is what makes a good beekeeper. And this is my contact information. That's my email address and my cell number. You are more than welcome to reach out to me anytime. My season is picking up, so it may be a day till I get back to you, but I do a lot of driving, so I do a lot of returning phone calls. If you just have questions, feel free. This is a cell phone, so you can text me. If you don't feel like asking a question tonight, message me, email me, call me, and I can talk to you about it. I will try to direct you as much as I can. I'll try to help you find your local club if you need help with that, or try to find a local producer. I do everything I can to try to help as much as possible. Were there any questions?
I have one for you.
Yes.
This is Russ. Do you think winter is broken up till we can start looking into the hives? I know I see them flying in and out of a few of my hives here.
Absolutely. That's a good question, Russ. Yes, I was in some colonies today, and I have been doing inspections on warm days. I personally like it to be above 60 degrees. So if it's 60 degrees and sunny outside, I think it's perfectly fine to take a peek in there. Now, I usually will just peek and see, is the queen laying? Does she look good? Do they still have some food? And then I close them back up. That's what I personally do. Just kind of this time of year, I don't go through the entire colony just to make sure that she's okay. Do you have pollen coming in, Russ? I figured you probably do down there.
I have one other comment if nobody else has a question. You
Okay.
can see it over there in the chat. I go into my hive thinking, I know there's mites in there. There's got to be mites in there. But I must be going blind or something. But I go in there with that mindset, and when I take frames out and it tears like a drone comb, like where the frames have stuck together, I don't see any mites. Where are they hiding? And also I do it with like the alcohol wash, and I've done it with a powder sugar roll. I must be doing something wrong because I can't find them.
Well, if you are losing colonies in the winter, especially December or January, that is usually due to mites or virus collapse. You are doing right. Like I do examine the drone brood, like you do. I prefer the alcohol wash. If using the alcohol wash, I do prefer using at least a 90% isopropyl, because that's more accurate than like the 50 or the 70%. I don't know what kind of container you're using for the alcohol wash. If you're using that one that the catalogs sell, I've used that one. I've also used one that I've made from Solo Cups. But usually that will give you the count if a new beekeeper, like until they learn, not, I know you're not new, but for the other new beekeepers that are in the group, until they learn how to monitor for the varroa, I usually straight recommend that they just treat. And usually the first treatment around the end of June, sometime in June, and then a fall treatment if they need it, and then an oxalic in December. And as a new beekeeper, you'll learn all that later. Sorry if I went too detailed there, but there are different treatments that you can use various times of year. And That's some part of that. Learned that about. Go.
This is called Varroa Easy Check, and
Okay.
I got it at one of the fall meeting, and it comes with the instructions on how to do it.
Okay.
It looks like just like a little cup with a little strainer on the inside and a cap on the top of it. Should anybody want to look that up?
Yes, thank you for that, Russ. Yeah, that's the one that I use. And the best thing to do is to make sure that the alcohol is all the way above the bees, and then swirling it kind of like a washing machine. And because sometimes the newer beekeepers try to shake it back and forth, but what you want to do is kind of swirl it around so that the mites fall down through the holes. But yeah, that was it. Varroa Easy Check.
I've got a question for you, Shanda.
Okay.
So not so much on the topic of beekeeping, I guess, but what can gardeners like myself do to help beekeeper friends, as far as practices and stuff that I can implement around the house here and in the garden?
That's a great thing, because I love, because a lot of people want to help beekeepers, but they don't want to be a beekeeper. So, because it is time consumptive. You can buy local honey from your local producer. You can encourage your landscaping to be more friendly, pollinator friendly. So look into planting pollinator friendly species. You can try not to, we have such a problem in this country of people, and I understand some people are under homeowners associations rules, but if you can plant like clover instead of grass, because a nice, beautiful lawn that's just grass is a bee desert. So clover is a great thing to have for honeybees. It provides nectar and pollen in a time where there may not be much. So what we were talking about earlier, the dearth periods, clover tends to bloom during those periods. So that's a great thing to have instead of grass. We need to kind of get away from that.
Awesome. Thank you, Shanda. Yeah.
You're welcome.
That's good advice. And I've listened to probably 3 or 4 presentations or so from you, and I always feel like I learned so much, just a wealth of information. I always enjoy your classes. Does anybody else have any questions for her here before we wrap things up?
Can I make another comment on that last question?
Yes.
Another thing that your neighbors who don't want to be beekeepers is teach them about when they're spraying pesticides. Don't spray the blooms, because the bees will go in there and work that bloom, and they're gathering up pesticides that they're taking back to their colony.
Good deal. Yeah, thanks, Russ.
Yeah, especially Russ, you're right on. I know a commonly used in gardens is Sevin dust. And sometimes honeybees can, remember how I was telling you, they can gather things that aren't pollen, like bird seed dust and animal seed dust. Sometimes they think that Sevin dust is kind of like a pollen type substance, and they try to gather, and I have seen it kill colonies. So maybe look into more organic and non-chemical ways to protect against things like flea beetles. I know flea beetles get after eggplants so bad. If something is blue, it's attractive to honeybees, and if you are putting something on that bloom, then honeybees are going to be exposed. So not necessarily if you're using it when there's no flowers, but if there is flowers, you need to be very careful of what you're using on that plant that has flowers on it, because when you're considering honeybees, you have to consider what's called risk. So a chemical may be toxic, but the exposure may be low, so therefore the risk is low. But if you are putting something toxic on something that honeybees are attracted to that has flowers, then the risk is really high. So that's something to look at if you're not a beekeeper, but you're wanting to help protect not only honeybees, but other pollinators.
Deal. I just went ahead and put our contact information in there, although I'm realizing I just threw on an extra 4 there, but you can give us a call there at 558-2210, and Shanda put her number in there in the comments. So definitely reach out to us. Any questions, Shanda, definitely she's your best go-to when it comes to bees and stuff. Anything else, feel free to contact me there at 558-2210. We'll get you squared away. Barring any other questions here, I guess we'll go ahead and wrap it up for tonight. Thanks again, Shanda, for doing this.
You're very welcome. Anytime.
Yeah, thanks so much, Shanda.
You're welcome.
All right, everybody, take care. We'll see you here in a couple weeks for equine management.
Thank you. Bye.